Anytime we begin something new, it can get a little bit overwhelming, right? And eating plant-based vegan food is no different. I mean, think about it. There's recipes, there's meal plans, there's a nutritional side of it. And then, what about going to the grocery store? Or what about going out to dinner and eating with friends? How do you really do all of that and make sure that it's plant-based vegan? Hi, this is Mark Dillon, host of the Mindful Vegan Podcast, and if this is something that you are exploring and you'd like some help along the way, I invite you to reach out to me and we can begin a conversation. You can simply go to mindfulvegan.com/contact. Send me your question and we can begin the conversation now. Once again, go to mindfulvegan.com/contact. Welcome to the Mindful Vegan Podcast. I'm your host, Mark Dillon. This show is all about how do you bring plant-based vegan food into your life. And I do that by sharing with you interviews with some of today's top people in the plant-based vegan world. And today, Mark Reinfeld, who has written a number of great vegan books, is here with us to share his thoughts and his journey on plant-based vegan food. Before we get into today's interview with Mark Reinfeld, I wanted to just take a moment and check in with you. Where are you along this journey to eating plant-based vegan? Are you at the very beginning? Like, this is one of the first things that you're starting to do is to explore a podcast and take in some new information. Or are you at the other end of the path and you've been eating vegan every single meal, every single snack without fail? Or are you somewhere in between those two extremes? You see, wherever you are on this journey, that's perfectly fine. And really, that's kind of exciting because you're making this journey. You're on the path, right? And one thing that I often like to look at is, where are you right now? Like, if you were to take a moment and actually write down where you are along this journey. Because what that can do is two things. Number one, it can show you how far you've come. I mean, even if it's just that this is your first step, this is the first podcast that you've even listened to, but you have begun. That's exciting, and it shows that you've made some positive changes. And then also seeing where you are, you can go into the next step, which is, where would you like to go next? You see, if we don't set up a goal, if we don't have some kind of thought of where we would like to go with this, what are the odds that you'll actually get there? That old analogy of a ship in the ocean without any sails is not really going to move around too far. You need to have something that can move you forward. You need to have a direction that you're going towards so that you can get there. If you have sails on the ship and you open them up in the right direction, you can start moving towards your goal. By the way, I have no idea when it comes to sailing, so I hope that this analogy makes a lot of sense. But really, if you don't know where you are and where you want to go to, how could you ever possibly get there? It would just be by chance that you'd actually end up. So then, when you know where you'd like to go to, that's off in the distance, right? That's further ahead. That's in the future. So what you could do then is, what's one step that you could do next? You know, oftentimes we want to plan things out, right? Oh, let me get a 5-year plan, and we create all this work, and we get pie charts, and we get visual graphics, and we get pictures for inspiration. But on a 5-year plan, seriously, you can't plan out for 5 years. There's too many variables. There's too many things that can change. But you can plan what your next step is. You can have the idea that this is where I'd like to be in 5 years, but you can't plan out all those steps realistically because too much can change. But you can plan your next step. So let's say, for example, right now, you've been eating vegan for a while and you eat at home every single day. Everything's always vegan. But when you go out, sometimes you don't eat everything that's vegan. Well, what if you set a goal that the next time you go out, you would make sure that you would have everything on that meal that was all vegan? That's a realistic goal. That's a goal that you can accomplish next, not in 5 years, not in 3 years, not in 2 years. That's under your control. It's reasonable, right? We don't want to set up a goal that's so high with expectations and so high with possibilities that we can't possibly get to it in 1 or 2 easy moves. So pick something that you could do next, that you could take on your journey. If you're brand new to this, what about just getting 3 great recipes, 3 simple recipes that you could make for the next 3 meals? Don't look at it as an overall project. Just break it down little by little. And then you can be making that path and that journey. And as you do that, you are eating plant-based vegan. You are doing it. You are walking this path. You are living this journey. Well, up next is the interview with Mark Reinfeld, and he's going to be sharing with us his journey to eating plant-based vegan food and his thoughts around it, as well as sharing some information on his newest book, Healing the Vegan Way. Mark's book is filled with about 200 recipes, but also he speaks about the healing qualities of the superfoods and the incredible foods that we can eat that are plant-based. I began the conversation with Mark at the very beginning for him, when he first started walking this path of eating plant-based vegan food. Let's begin by really starting right at the very beginning for you. And if you could share when you first started to explore vegan plant-based food.
Thank you for that question. I like framing it with the beginning of the journey. And for me, I grew up eating a standard American diet. And it wasn't until after I graduated college, I took a year off before going to law school, and I traveled through Europe and was on a kibbutz in Israel. And it was during that time on the kibbutz where I started connecting with animals in a new way, and that's when I decided to stop eating them. And after Israel, I went on to India, which is very veggie-friendly, and I did a trek to Mount Everest in Nepal and was just able to really see animals in more of a natural setting, and so that solidified my journey towards becoming vegan.
And so how long did it take? Because it sounds like at that point you were eating vegetarian. So what was the transition like then from vegetarian to vegan for you?
For me, switching to vegetarian was more of an overnight decision through the love of animals, and vegetarian to vegan came more slowly over maybe several months or a year, where I just started to feel better without the dairy and eggs. So things that have been plaguing me, like earaches and congestion and sore throats, so when I started eliminating the dairy and eggs, I just started feeling better. And then I started educating myself on the other aspects of a vegan diet, the environmental impact, and just learning about factory farming, even for dairy and egg production. So that's when I made the shift to vegan.
I think for a lot of people who are listening right now, they often are in a transition point. And so as you were going through that transition, was it a transition for you of, okay, right now I'm going to give up cheese, or right now I'm going to give up eggs? Or was it a transition of, I'm going to start reducing the amount of eggs or the amount of cheese that I'm taking in?
It's interesting for me. I think it was more gradual, that I would just say go periods without having dairy, and then have a cheesy lasagna and then feel all congested afterwards. And so the space between the cheese became larger and larger. And then once I read Diet for a New America and started learning about the conditions on factory farms, and then once I was grounded in that information, then I was like, that's it. It's over.
So as you were traveling around, you're being exposed to this kind of vegetarian world and everything. What about in your relationships, in your friendships, in your family? Did you have anybody that was close to you that had either been exploring that with you or that was already kind of along that path? Or were you kind of the pioneer for those within your social circle?
On some level, I was a pioneer. I actually, in my junior year of college, I studied in London for the year, and that's when I met my first vegetarians, and they struck me as very kind and sophisticated. And even though I wasn't vegetarian at the time, it definitely left an imprint on me. And so when I came back home after the second travels to India and Nepal, I pretty much was the only one I knew at that point who was vegetarian. This was in the basically 1990 is when I made the switch.
Wow, so you've been vegetarian and vegan for quite some time, and really going back to that time, because for myself it was the mid-90s that I went vegan. There weren't the resources that we had available today. So what was that like for you? What was it like to find the food that you wanted to eat?
It was definitely more of a challenge than it is today, and interestingly enough, I was in law school after that trip when I became vegetarian, and after deciding I didn't want to go to law school, I pretty much got rid of everything that wouldn't fit in my car and drove out west and landed in California, and I started working in a health food store in the kitchen, and that's when I started experimenting as a chef. So back in the mid-90s was when I began my culinary career, and it was always as a vegetarian. So I've always been surrounded by vegetarian and vegan food, so it was easy on that level, but not easy as far as going out or finding it when traveling.
Well, this is really cool because this really takes us further along into where you are now, when we'll talk a lot, I'm sure, about your current situation with your cooking and your teaching and different things like that. But let's go back to that. You're now in California. You're working in a kitchen and you're starting to prepare this vegan and vegetarian food. Is that really for you the first kind of connection to being in the kitchen, or do you have strong memories growing up and feeling an attraction or a drawing towards cooking and being in the kitchen?
I actually always enjoyed cooking. My grandfather was a renowned chef and ice carver, and I remember him cooking up these crazy meals, and he's just a very mad scientist chef and amazing ice carver with swans and fins, thin pieces of ice that he would carve up until his dying day in his 80s. He was still carving ice in a wheelchair, an oxygen tank, and using a chainsaw. So he is definitely a charismatic influence in my life in the culinary world. He was definitely not vegetarian or vegan.
So now let's talk a little bit about this transition, and now here you are. I mean, you have written and been involved in a number of books. You are a vegan chef, and in addition to that, you also teach vegan cooking. Can you talk about how that professional side of this journey that you're on came into play for you?
Thank you for asking. So I was in the kitchen in California in the health food store. I was there for a few years, and I really had the opportunity to get very creative in the kitchen and do a lot of experimentation. And after a few years there, I branched off and formed a consulting service called the Blossoming Lotus, and I started working with training other people on how to prepare vegetarian and vegan dishes. Actually, at that point, I was just all vegan and raw food at that point. And I found that, as you know, even if you go to culinary school, people aren't very familiar with vegan cooking techniques. So now we're in the late 90s. 98 was when I started the Blossoming Lotus as a private chef and consulting company. And I started servicing corporate accounts in New York City, Credit Suisse First Boston, and the Peninsula Spa, and did projects in Aspen and outside of Chicago. And then I started developing this repertoire of menu and recipe creation and chef trainings. And I went to Kauai in 2002 on a 2-week vacation and wound up staying for about 6 years. So I think it's the longest recorded 2-week vacation, or up there with long 2-week vacations. And I formed the Blossoming Lotus Cafe with people that were looking to create a vegan cafe. And I had all of this menu and recipe development experience. So that's when the restaurant took form in Kauai in 2002. And since then, I've started working on the cookbooks. And now, as you mentioned, I just released actually my 7th cookbook called Healing the Vegan Way.
Looking back over your years of teaching people to start cooking this way, if you can kind of go back, I mean, that's almost 20 years ago that you really began doing that. The person who started back then and was exploring this and learning to cook vegan compared to somebody today, have you noticed a difference in those that are coming to you? Is it the same kind of person, or are you finding people nowadays that are coming in that have much more of a background already with vegan or vegetarian food?
Another great question. So the last 5 years or so, I've been traveling internationally, teaching these 10-day workshops and immersions and 5-day immersions, like going pretty deep into the art of vegan and raw food preparation. I also do teacher trainings to work with people on how to create cooking classes in their community. And what I found is such a broad cross-section of the population now are coming. I've had firemen, police officers. I even had a cattle rancher take a class. I've had Iraq war vets, medical doctors taking the class, yoga teachers, grandparents taking the class with their grandchildren, husbands and wives, brothers and sisters. So it's really a full cross-section now of the population.
And as you've worked with different people over these years, have you seen any common maybe preconceived notions that people have as they come to you and they start exploring this, or is it all over the place?
It's quite diverse. Like, I like to say that the journey to becoming vegan or plant-based is you enter through one of 3 doors into the same room, and those doors are the health or medical door, the environmental or political door, or the ethical or animal rights door. And for me, once you enter the doors and you're in the room, you start learning about the other reasons. So it really depends on what door the people entered in. I've had, for instance, someone who had diabetes take my class, and during a 5-day training, and his numbers were the best they had ever been since he was diagnosed. And so he continued to embrace essentially raw food diet, and now his results are normal. I've had people who are professional chefs. I've had cordon bleu trained chefs take my class, and they're looking just to expand their repertoire of techniques, and other people that are just in it for like ethical reasons, and so they just want to become an activist, which is what I encourage people. I like to use the word food activism. So that's a point that I emphasize in my classes, that this really is a form of activism. Eating this way and teaching other people how to prepare this kind of food, for me, is a potent form of activism.
And you mentioned that, with all this teaching, I know that there are many people around the world who listen to the podcast, and they may not know anybody, even in their community. There may not be any really even vegan-friendly restaurants nearby, but you offer this teaching that they don't have to come directly to you, correct? They can actually go online and learn more about this?
Yes, I have an online version of the 10-day training that I do, where you could download the training manual, and there's videos up on the site that go through the techniques. And I do actually have events scheduled in Europe. This summer I'll be in Europe, so I try to make it over to Europe when I can, and I do culinary tours to like Peru and Belize. So I try to bring the mountain to the people if they can't come to me, and then there's also the online version as well.
Now, going back to when you first started eating, vegan and learning about even vegetarian food back then, I mean, I do remember back in the 90s, there weren't a lot of resources available as far as books. I mean, clearly the internet was not a resource that we could turn to.
Yeah.
But you've written 7 books over these years, and how would you say your message has changed within the books? Have you seen a transformation or a difference in teaching that you're offering?
Oh, I could tell you've done a lot of interviews. Your questions you're asking amazing questions. Thank you.
Oh, thanks.
It's emphasized the same. The doorway I entered through is a path of nonviolence. So for me, I feel what the world needs is compassion and mindfulness and nonviolent approach to life. So that's the underlying message for me in everything that I do. The cookbooks have different themes to them. The first book was called Vegan Fusion World Cuisine, and the idea with that is really emphasizing the culinary traditions, the wisdom, the sacred sites, the beauty, the philosophy, the art, and the culture from around the world, and emphasizing what unites humanity, the idea of world fusion cuisine in that way. And so for me, that's like probably my life's work at that point. Is it's a full color book. It's has Dr. Jane Goodall wrote the forward to that, and it really summed up the essence of this underlying philosophical approach of tolerance and nonviolence. Then I moved into doing more of the quick and easy books. That's where I did the Idiot's Guide to Eating Raw, and then the 30-Minute Vegan series, and that was just this idea of quick and easy meals. So there's 30-Minute Vegan, 30-Minute Vegan's Taste of the East, which is Asian cuisine, 30-Minute Vegan's Taste of Europe, which is European, and then I did a book called Soups On, which I like to promote as vegan soups for the chicken soul. Let that sink in a little. That takes a little while to sink in. And then, and throughout this whole time, I've always been interested in the healing quality of food. So that's been a big part of my journey. I did a master's degree in holistic nutrition while I was working as a chef, because I was fascinated by this idea that foods have these healing qualities. And if you could actually look at what you need healing, what condition you need to be healed, and then there are foods that can help you in that. So Healing the Vegan Way, which is the last book, it has over 200 recipes, and it has contributions from some of the leading plant-based medical doctors and dietitians, Dr. Clapper, Dr. Greger, Hans Diehl, who did the CHIP program, Brenda Davis, Juliana Haver. And so it really, to me, it's a concise expression of the power that plants have to heal and transform our lives.
Yeah, and I mean, what timing, because it really does feel like, I mean, if you go back to when we first started eating this way, it wasn't so much focused on, you know, the health aspect. As a matter of fact, I've met so many vegans over the years that say, I don't really care that I'm eating that healthy. I really care about that, you know, I'm helping to reduce suffering.
Yeah.
But right now, it really is a huge focus. And I think that it may have started to really tip, you know, back when like the China study started coming out, but now with like, you know, Dr. Greger's book out there,
right,
Dr. McDougall out there sharing things, there's that combination now of, wow, this is great for animals. It is good for the planet, but my goodness, I can transform my body and really stack the odds in my favor here.
Totally. Yeah. It's a win-win on every level. And it's interesting because in the classes that I've done, I have my 30th 10-day training is coming up. So I have in Denver. And so I have a lot of people with vast backgrounds taking the class. And there's so much information out there about which nutritional approach is the best, even within the plant-based community, and there's certain agreements. And for me, the approach I was taking was like, I personally feel a plant-based diet is the healthiest and the optimal diet for humans. And for me, as long as we can show that it is just as healthy as anything else, because you could really, I think, argue till the end of time about which diet is healthier. You know, I have my own opinion, but when it comes down to like the environmental impact and then just the amount of the compassionate choice, that's where, to me, it stands on its own. It's in its own league, the plant-based diet, as like what I feel is really the only sustainable way for us to have a long-term vision for survival, you know, and feeding humanity.
And so going back to when you first started, you know, it seemed like a lot of the cooking that was kind of, I guess maybe as a stereotype in a sense for eating vegan or eating vegetarian, it was very plain. It was very simple foods. And of course, now it seems like much of the vegan food, it's as much this food that we can eat and enjoy, but it's also very much like art. It's very, very creative. Can you talk about how you've noticed that explosion in a sense of creating beautiful, delicious food?
For me, that's another theme that I like to emphasize is this idea of food as art. And so just like the canvas, the nature provides all of these colors and textures and flavors for us to work with on our, create these culinary masterpieces. So it's always been a big part of my approach to food, is to have that full engagement with the senses. So have it look amazing, have there be like contrast of color and texture and layers of flavors. And I think my grandfather's influence also of just being, because he was just this very creative garde-manger where you would do elaborate garnishes and presentations. So it's been a big part of what I do. And I encourage people to look up Instagram, and you could look for food plating ideas. And while a lot of them aren't plant-based, they still give you wonderful ideas on how to create these unique colors and presentations on the plates.
So while this vegan cuisine can be this delicious, creative, artful, just amazingly stunning, beautiful, and tasty dish, it can also just be something that we can put together quickly and easily. So let's maybe in our mind, if you've been working all day, you're exhausted, you get home, you're tired, what's something that you would put together very quickly and very simply that maybe it wouldn't be something you would present at the restaurant or share as a great cooking lesson, but it's just like, yeah, I can eat this. This is good. It's yummy. It's delicious.
Excellent. Thank you for asking that. So here's my take on this. Like, what I like to do in my classes, and in the Healing the Vegan Way book, I emphasize this idea of a template recipe. And so the idea with a template is you view a recipe in general terms and then break it down into its component parts. And by changing each component, you're essentially creating a new recipe. So I'll say, like, even in my trainings, we could do 100 recipes, but people are actually learning tens of thousands of recipes with this concept in mind. So what I'll share with you now is like my go-to meal, and I'll show you how, if you view it as a template, it's actually, here's thousands of ways you could create this quick and easy meal. This idea was introduced to me by my business partner, Bo Rinaldi, the idea of a monk bowl. And Bo had been talking about bowls 15 years ago before there were a lot of bowls. Their bowls are very popular now. So with the monk bowl, the idea is it's a grain, a green, and a protein. And so if you look at that as a template, you can replace the grain with any kind of rice, quinoa, which is actually a seed, or amaranth, millet, buckwheat, or I like using rice pasta. And so you rotate through those. The green is essentially any vegetable or combination of vegetables of your choosing, with an emphasis for me on including as many colorful ingredients as you can in your diet, with like a lot of greens as part of that. And so those veggies could be raw, steamed, roasted, grilled, lightly sautéed. And then for the protein, I rotate through tempeh, tofu, or any of the legumes. And so for me, that's my go-to meal. And then I'll add a little nutritional yeast and a splash of tamari and maybe some hemp oil. And so what a common meal for me would be cooking a pot of steamed quinoa, taking a toaster oven and heat it to like 400 and put a piece of tempeh with a little tamari and maybe some coconut oil, and roast that for like 15 minutes, and then steam vegetables for about 10 minutes. So within about 20 minutes or so, you could have this bowl together. And then if you want to get more elaborate, you could either make a sauce, or even if you're in a pinch for time, use a store-bought like barbecue or peanut or teriyaki sauce to give a variety of flavor to the dishes.
Well, I know this next question is one of these questions like asking a parent that has 10 kids, which one is your favorite? But let's say that maybe one of your favorites, Mark, is you travel around the world. What's one restaurant that you would say, hey, if you're in this neck of the woods sometime, check this one out?
That is another good question. Well, if you're in Portland, I'm a little biased, but the Blossoming Lotus is in Portland. There's Harlow's is a place in Portland that's really good. If you're in New York, Chloe's is good. Peace Cafe, I think is the name of it, is good. They're actually my favorite restaurant in New York City is called Hangawi, which is a Korean vegan cuisine. Down here in Miami, I've actually helped 2 restaurants with their menu, Full Bloom and Holi Vegan Kitchen, because I actually do corporate consulting as well, where I'll help people develop vegan recipes for their restaurant. That's a short list to start. In Paris, the Gentle Gourmet has an amazing vegan restaurant there. They're amazing people that I know.
Great. Now, as you're looking for vegan resources, do you find that there's an app that you like or maybe an online resource that you often turn to?
Typically, Happy Cow is that's what I recommend for vegan travel. The key to successful vegan travel is to be well researched. So if you know you're going to be going somewhere, a place like Happy Cow could direct you to where the natural food stores are, any restaurant that has like vegan offerings. So that's one of my go-to apps.
Let's say that you were in a community and there wasn't. You were using Happy Cow and it's like, okay, I'm looking for a restaurant and you don't find one, but you're getting together with people and they're choosing a restaurant that isn't vegan, doesn't have vegan options. What would you do in that situation? How would you find something there to eat?
I've actually never, I've been able to have decent meals even in a steakhouse when my family wanted to go there. You usually just kind of look at the menu to see if they have any veggie side dishes. You know, if you have to get to the baked potato, some veggies and a salad, then you could either, one tip is just eat before you go so you're not super hungry when you get there and you could just kind of graze on whatever vegan options they had. I just, as well, you could find usually in Thai restaurants, Indian restaurants, Mexican restaurants, there's ways to put together a vegan meal.
Looking at where we are right now with so many changes happening, it seems, with a lot of the processed foods and things like that, and a lot of the new styles and people creating these beautiful vegan dishes, where do you see vegan food going in the future? Is there anything really on the horizon that you're a little bit excited about?
I like to say, you probably know this as well, but the vegan cheese scene is exploding. So I like to say that no cheese will remain unconquered, and that there's there's plant-based versions of all of these different artisan cheeses. Miyoko's Creamery puts out some incredible cheeses. There's vegan cheese shops opening up, vegan butcher shops opening up. So in my, like yourself, I've been involved in the movement for decades, and I see a clear movement of it's becoming more acceptable by the mainstream. So I would envision there being like a shift where the vegan options, instead of being 10 to 20%, they're the 90 to 80%, where there's more options, so that what we see now, like you'll see like a Pizza Hut and a Taco Bell and a Burger King, like those concepts, there'll be similar plant-based versions that are more common than they are now. So vegan drive-thrus, more of the vegan section in supermarkets expanding, more places just kind of making that shift over to much more plant-based offerings than we're seeing now.
Yeah, it's really, I completely agree with you. And I remember when I was interviewing Moby and he spoke about within his lifetime, he thinks that, this is going to become much more of the social norm than the uniqueness. And even going into places like Target and walking down the aisles in their grocery sections and seeing signs that say plant-based. It's like, wow, this is so different than, as you probably remember, back in the 90s, trying to find a natural food store, which often was a very small mom and pop run place, and now it's like we can go to almost any grocery store and get incredible things.
I agree. It's amazing. I've always viewed it as a revolution and revolutionary way of looking at life. And for me, this going back to the idea of using mindfulness and compassion and nonviolence, and the idea of 7-generation thinking, where we're making decisions that are taking future generations into consideration. all of that to me points towards more of a plant-based world than we're seeing now. And it just like, yeah, in these last 10 or 20 years, it blows my mind, 7-Eleven using vegan mayonnaise. Like, you never would have thought that you would see something like that.
Earlier on, Mark, you mentioned something to the effect of, activism and preparing food. Can you talk a little bit about that and your thoughts around that?
For me, now that I've taught classes and I've taught teachers how to teach classes, it's very fulfilling when you share a healthy meal with someone, and then there's another level when you show them how to prepare healthy food. Like, you probably heard the saying, if you give a person a block of tofu, you could feed them for a day, but if you show them how to bake the tofu, you could feed them for a lifetime. Some version of that you might have heard before. And so this idea of empowering people to take their health back into their own hands by learning how to work with plant-based foods, to me, is a very strong form of activism. And so it's on the human health aspect, the environmental aspect, and to me, what the world needs a lot of now is just more peaceful energy and less violence in the world. So we have that opportunity every day to choose what we're bringing into this world. And so I just encourage people to view preparing food for someone as like an act of goodness for humanity. And that's why I love doing what I do, of especially the trainings and the teacher trainings, to just really empower people, to show them how easy it is to create food that tastes good. And that's the key for me, is because I've spoken at, like, I recently spoke at the Plant-Based Prevention of Disease Conference, and there's a lot of research and talks about the benefits of plant-based foods. The key, though, is having the food taste good. So no matter how much information we may have, if we're not able to create food that tastes good, it's not going to go very far. So that's where I see my role in my classes and the cookbooks and the online trainings.
Well, this is beautiful, because I see this as you're saying that, of course, and you even said that we do this 3 times a day. So we have 3 opportunities every single day. And when you look at how we as humans have evolved over the years, and even if you just look at, your own life right now, when you get together with friends, with family, how many times do people say, we always end up in the kitchen? We're always there cooking, we're putting things together, we're sharing, we're talking, we're laughing, we're bonding. It truly is the place where that activism can start and just completely blossom from there and grow.
Yeah. A friend likes to say, life happens around food. And it's true that, like you mentioned, that's the core of when we gather. There's usually food is at the center of it.
Well, Mark, you've shared so much with us today. If the listeners would like to stay in touch with the work that you're currently doing, what's the best way that they could do that?
Through our website, veganfusion.com, or I could be reached through email at info@veganfusion.com, and we put out a free newsletter with recipes and information on living an inspired life. And I have several trainings coming up in Colorado and Portland and in England. So if people are interested in learning more, they could contact me through the website.
Well, thank you very much for sharing all of this with us today. I really appreciate your time, and the information that you shared is just incredible. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate all the amazing work that you're doing, and may it continue to blossom for you.
As always, I invite you to visit mindfulvegan.com and check out the blog post for each individual episode. If you'd like to go directly to today's episode, it's very easy. Go to mindfulvegan.com/78. And there, you'll be able to find all the resources that Mark shared with you, including easy-to-click links so you can check out Mark's information and his newest book, and so much more. Going back to what I spoke about at the very beginning of the podcast, just a simple reminder. Write down where you are right now along your journey. Write down where you would like to go. And then, and this is the most important one, what's the next step that you can do to get you closer to your goal to eating plant-based vegan? As always, I look forward to getting together with you again next week, and I invite you to check out mindfulvegan.com for more details. Until then, go enjoy some great plant-based vegan food. Take care.